Here I have 30 significant quotations that focus on the character Mrs Birling in, as you can see, J.B. Priestley's and Inspector Calls. Somehow I've whittled it down to 10 quotations. 10 quotations that I think are essential for you to know when revising this character. But which 10 are they? Let's find out. So you want some quotations about the character Mrs Birling in J.B. Priestley's play and Inspector Calls? Well, you've come to the right place. My name's Liam, aka Mr Knight, aka DystopiaJunkie, and in this video I will give you 10 quotations about Mrs Birling, and either side of that I will provide a quick summary about her and a quick summary about what I think Priestley's intentions were when writing her character. Make sure you have a pen and paper out in front of you, as I will be saying a lot of things that won't necessarily be appearing on screen during this video. And of course, if you think that this video is super helpful and that you would like to see more content like this, you can let me know by dropping the video a like, commenting on it, and of course, subscribing to my channel too. I have recently hit 400 subscribers, and so I guess the race is on to hit 500. Can I do it before the end of the year? Here is my quick summary of Mrs Birling. Her name is Mrs Sybil Birling. She is Arthur Birling's wife and also the mother of Eric and Sheila Birling. Whether or not she's a particularly nice mother is something that I'll leave you to interpret. She is middle class, and it appears that she was born into the middle class. She is aware of social conventions and etiquette, and as such picks up other characters on this throughout the play. She is about 50 years old, so she is one of the older characters in the play. Her age and social class may contribute towards her having very traditional views. Her attitude towards gender, class, and responsibility may be typical of views seen as traditional in 1912. And finally, she is a prominent member of the Brumley Women's Charity Organisation, which we can assume is a charitable organisation for women that is based in Brumley. Remember that there was little in the way of welfare in 1912. And so charities like this would be how the most disadvantaged gained support. But you would know that already if you watched my context video. Anyway, Mrs Birling used this influence to reject the pregnant Eva/Daisy's request for financial support only weeks before her death. Just like I did in my videos for Mr Birling, Sheila and Gerald, I am going to start by looking at how the opening stage directions present Mrs Birling. If you want to see all of those videos, click the link that's appearing in the top right of your screen, as it will take you through to my entire playlist for and Inspector Calls. So what do the stage directions say about Mrs Birling? Well, they say Mr Birling's wife is about 50, a rather cold woman, and her husband's social superior. So the stage directions tell us 3 things. First, Mrs Birling's identity is rooted in the fact that she is a married woman. This is indicative of the patriarchal society of 1912, but perhaps also of her being a very traditional character. She has performed the role expected of her as a woman and has married into another family. Secondly, we are told that she is cold. This means that she is unfriendly, unsympathetic, and not particularly pleasant. This may anticipate her emotional detachment in the play that follows. Finally, she is her husband's social superior, which could suggest that she is a bit snobby, a stickler for rules and etiquette, and could indicate that the power dynamic between her and Mr. Birling is not as straightforward as we might expect. Our second quotation comes only moments into the play. When Mr. Birling tells his wife to praise their cook for the dinner, Mrs. Birling's dialogue is as follows. Reproachfully, "Arthur, you're not supposed to say such things." So first of all, it is important that we understand how Mrs. Birling is to say these lines. Reproachfully means disapprovingly or disappointedly. And so Sybil is sort of telling off her husband at this point. Why? Because apparently it goes against etiquette to praise your cook in front of a guest, and it would certainly go against how the upper class would have acted in 1912, let alone a middle-class family trying to show that they are equal to the upper class. Furthermore, the fact that she is telling her husband off in front of a guest might show that class boundaries are something that she prioritizes over gender boundaries, as it would not necessarily be proper for a wife to scold her husband this openly. This develops our earlier idea of Mrs. Birling being a stickler for rules and a bit of a snob. Class seems to constantly occupy her mind, even during what should be a happy family occasion. Our third quotation comes quite a bit later, right at the start of Act 2. Mrs. Birling excuses herself fairly early on in Act 1, and our quotation comes shortly after she returns to the scene in Act 2 and meets the inspector for the first time. When she sees how Sheila tries to explain how the rest of the family have responded to the inspector, Mrs. Birling says, "You seem to have made a great impression on this child, Inspector." Mrs. Birling's dialogue is very patronising. The phrase "this child" seems derisory, as if she is completely dismissing her daughter without considering her point. This dismissal suggests that she does not take the younger generation seriously, showing how close-minded the older generation can be in this play. Our fourth quotation comes only moments later, as Mrs. Birling responds to Sheila's claim that she wants to stay so that she can understand why Eva/Daisy committed suicide. An important part of Mrs. Birling's response is, "And in any case, I don't suppose for a moment that we can understand why the girl committed suicide. Girls of that class." I've included this quotation as it shows a lot about Mrs. Birling's attitudes towards class. She describes Eva/Daisy as a girl who is part of that class. The fact that she cannot even bring herself to name the class indicates that, to her, the phrase working class is something dirty or rude or offensive, and it simultaneously suggests that she looks down on them. Furthermore, she claims that we, meaning herself and Sheila, middle-class women, cannot understand why Eva/Daisy committed suicide, and then goes on to start making a comment about class, suggesting that it is because they belong to different classes that they cannot understand each other's perspectives. I would go as far as claiming that Mrs. Birling almost sees the working class as a different species, something so far removed from her own experiences that she cannot even begin to comprehend what life must be like for them. And yet the worst thing is that she does not even seem to want to make the effort to understand the working class either. Our next quotation comes from the inspector's interrogation of Mrs. Birling. She reveals that Eva/Daisy came to the Brumley Women's Charity Organisation seeking assistance, but that when she went there, she did not go by Eva Smith or Daisy Renton. No, instead, in Mrs. Birling's words, first, she called herself Mrs. Birling, and naturally that was one of the things that prejudiced me against her case. Please note that the ellipsis in square brackets indicates that I've chopped up the text a little bit, but I have not changed any of the meaning. Both parts of the quotation, so each bit either side of the ellipsis, can be found on the bottom third of page 43 of the play. Anyway, first of all, Mrs. Birling openly admits to being prejudiced against Eva/Daisy's case, as if holding prejudiced views is perfectly normal and is nothing to be ashamed of. Admittedly, one of the things that created this prejudice was the fact that Eva/Daisy claimed to be a Birling, suggesting that Mrs. Birling does not appreciate her family name being tarnished, especially by association with a working class woman. However, the name issue is only one of the things that's prejudiced Mrs. Birling against Eva/Daisy. We cannot know for certain what else was said in the meeting, but is it possible that Mrs. Birling felt prejudiced against Eva/Daisy based purely on class prejudices? Possibly, given we have seen how she looks down on the working class earlier on in the play. Could she also be prejudiced against her because she was pregnant? Also possible, given that Mrs. Birling holds very traditional views, and having a child out of wedlock certainly goes against these. Certainly, the fact that she is so openly prejudiced against Eva/Daisy presents Mrs. Birling as cold, unsympathetic, and lacking in social responsibility. Our sixth quotation comes only moments later. Speaking to the inspector, Mrs. Birling says, "Unlike the other three, I did nothing I'm ashamed of, or that won't bear investigation." There's three quick things we can say about this. First of all, by comparing herself to the other three, Mrs. Birling presents herself as superior to her husband, daughter, and possible son-in-law. The preposition unlike does this in particular, as she is setting herself apart from the others, who have all done various things that they could or should be ashamed of. Secondly, by saying that she did nothing I'm ashamed of, Mrs. Birling presents herself as cold and uncaring. She knows that Eva/Daisy is dead, and also that she was pregnant, and yet Mrs. Birling does not regret her refusal to provide support. She genuinely does not feel any guilt or remorse about the role she played in the young woman's death, which is shocking, especially considering that there really is not much between Eva/Daisy and Sheila, in terms of age at the very least. Finally, she claims that her actions won't bear investigation, basically meaning that if the police investigate her, she'll be okay, as she has done nothing illegal. This suggests that Mrs. Birling equates morality with legality, meaning that if she has not broken the law, she has done the right thing. And our seventh quotation comes only moments later once again. Certainly, a lot is revealed about Mrs. Birling during her interrogation. After the inspector reveals that Eva/Daisy was pregnant when she saw Mrs. Birling, Arthur and Sheila start to voice their concern at Mrs. Birling's actions. Mrs. Birling's response to this is agitated now. "Oh, stop it, both of you! And please remember before you start accusing me of anything again that it wasn't I who had her turned out of her employment, which probably began it all." The stage directions reveal that she is getting tense, flustered, or on edge when her family starts to turn against her, suggesting that she values family loyalty highly, as we see elsewhere in the play, such as when she is disappointed at Gerald for only telling her on this night that Eric drinks heavily. However, what is interesting is that as soon as her family begin to turn on her, or at least stop supporting her so openly, she turns nasty. Feeling threatened, she shifts the blame onto her husband and daughter, asserting that it was probably their fault that Eva/Daisy ended up dead in the first place. This problematizes what I just said about her valuing family loyalty, as it seems that as much as she values this highly, she values self-preservation highest of all, a trait we see in Arthur and Gerald to varying degrees too. And so Mrs. Birling will seek to maintain this, even at the expense of her family members. Our 8th quotation comes at the end of Act 2. The penny is starting to drop, and the characters are starting to realise that the father of Eva/Daisy's unborn child was in fact Eric. Mrs. Birling's response is agitated. "I don't believe it. I won't believe it." Again, she is agitated. The stage directions reveal that she is tense, on edge, or flustered. This may be because the illusion of her family that she has constructed in her mind, which is that they are a respectable, well-to-do, middle-class family, is being shattered by the revelation that Eric impregnated a woman, a working-class woman at that, out of wedlock. The use of modal verbs in this quotation is interesting. At first, Mrs. Birling does not believe that Eric got Eva/Daisy pregnant. This suggests that the reality of the situation is so far removed from her expectations that she cannot comprehend it. However, what is interesting is that she then says that she won't believe it, which implies that Mrs. Birling refuses to accept the reality that is being presented to her. This shows that she has an "it can't happen here" attitude. She knows that terrible, unsavoury or sordid things happen in the world, but she never thought that they would happen in her world, her family, highlighting the ignorance that she, and perhaps the rest of the middle class, has. Our penultimate quotation comes after Gerald announces that Inspector Gould was probably a fraud. She says, triumphantly, "Didn't I tell you? Didn't I say I couldn't imagine a real police inspector talking like that to us?" These lines of dialogue reveal a few different things to us. First of all, the adverb triumphantly in the stage directions reveals to us that Mrs. Birling feels like she has won. She feels like she has won because if the inspector is a fraud, she will not face any repercussions for her actions. Secondly, the repetition of "didn't I?" and then a speech-based verb shows that Mrs. Birling is incredibly eager, desperate almost, to be proved correct. This may be so that she is able to feel superior once again, even if that is just to her own family, which the repetition of the pronoun I implies. Finally, her second question may reveal something about her views of class. She does not think a real police inspector would talk to them in the way that Inspector Gould did, which was authoritatively, demanding, and ultra-professional. Perhaps she believes that police inspectors should only talk in that way to the working class, or that they should talk politely and respectfully to the middle and upper classes, even when conducting an investigation. Certainly, she does not think the way in which Inspector Gould spoke to them was acceptable for a police inspector talking to the middle and upper class. Our final quotation comes right at the end of the play, and is Mrs. Birling's reaction to Eric and Sheila, who have shown that they have really learned from the inspector's teachings. Mrs. Birling says, "They're overtired. In the morning they'll be as amused as we are." There are two things that I want to look at here. First is the way in which Mrs. Birling has once again undermined the younger generation. They are stunned by the events of the evening, and although they are probably experiencing some sort of shock, they have learned a great deal about the world. She has written their shock off as tiredness, dismissing it entirely as something transient and unimportant. Of course, this shows how ignorant she is, but I really want to highlight the fact that she is saying this about her own children. Rather than look after them and see to their emotional needs, she brushes them to one side. Not only is Mrs. Birling cold and careless, she is unfit to be a parent. Secondly, she says that she and her husband, and probably Gerald, are amused by this whole situation. At this point in the play, she believes that there is no Inspector Goole, that no girl has died tonight, and that rather than the entire family having an impact on one girl's life, they each had an effect on a different girl. Simply put, she does not care anymore, because she does not think that there will be any real repercussions for her. She has not seen the error of her ways, and does not consider her actions, refusing to help a poor woman out because of one-dimensional prejudice, to be wrong in any way. As I have said in the video for each character so far, you will find it hard to get into the top grades without considering the author's intentions. So why did Priestley create Mrs. Birling the way he created her? What would be missing from the play if she was not in it? First of all, I argue that through his generally negative presentation of Mrs. Birling, J.B. Priestley is presenting tradition, or traditional views, as being flawed and outdated. Certainly, Mrs. Birling holds the most traditional views out of any character in the play, in terms of how she views gender and class and responsibility. And so you could say that she is a representative of tradition. Priestley may have presented traditional views in such a negative way because it may have been them that caused, enforced, and maintained the rampant class divisions found in pre-war Britain, and may have also been a contributing factor to Britain engaging in the fire and blood and anguish of the two world wars. This negative presentation may have been his way of encouraging his audience to be more progressive with their views. Secondly, Priestley has used Mrs. Birling in order to demonize class prejudice. Certainly, I don't think anybody would watch this play and think that they would like to adopt Mrs. Birling's views on class by the end of it. By revealing how damaging class prejudice can be, Priestley may have been trying to motivate his audience to see beyond class boundaries and instead consider the people that lay beyond them. And finally, Priestley uses Sybil Birling as a way of exposing how ignorant the middle class can be. She seems to think that unsavoury behaviour is something that only belongs to the working class, and that the middle and upper classes are pure and wonderful. In doing this, he may have been urging his audience to reflect on their own behaviour. Have they ever behaved in despicable ways to other people, particularly the less advantaged? Certainly, this reflection may have resulted in the audience improving their behaviour, addressing their biases, and generally changing for the better. So that is our discussion of Sybil Birling over. But what could you do next? Well, aside from liking the video, dropping a comment on it, and subscribing to this channel if you haven't done so already. You could create a Mrs Birling mind map. Grab a piece of paper, the larger the better, or do this across 2 A4 pieces. In the centre, write Mrs Birling. Around this, but still pretty close to the centre, write a descriptive word or phrase that you think accurately describes her character. So you could write cold, or prejudiced, or snobby, or something else entirely. Try to write at least 6 different words or phrases, making sure that you don't just write a bunch of synonyms. Around each description of Mrs Birling, write at least 1 quotation, although 2 or 3 might be better. Make sure those quotations match the description that you just gave her. So which quotations show her to be cold, or prejudiced, or snobby? Try to pick the best, most specific quotations you can. The shorter the better. Now, off from each quotation that you have written, I think it would be an excellent idea for you to do a quick bit of analysis. You could do that in note form, especially because that might be quicker and easier for you to revise from. But whatever you do, I definitely recommend that you get this done whilst this video and the character of Mrs Birling is still fresh in your mind. That's how you will benefit the most when it comes to your final exams. Alongside each bit of written analysis, I would also include a note about how the audience might react when they watch this part of the play. What might they feel or imagine or think? Again, if you're looking to achieve the top grades, I would also try to incorporate a comment about Priestley's intentions in this too. So why did the audience feel, imagine or think a certain way? And why did Priestley want that to happen? So there we go, that is the video more or less over. I really do hope that this video has helped you with your GCSE English Literature Revision, and that you feel so much more confident when it comes to tackling this play or character now. If you are in the middle of revising, please do remember to take frequent short breaks. As a burned out student, it's not a happy or successful student, which are 2 things that you definitely deserve to be. So there we go. Those were the 10 quotations that I think are most important for you to know when thinking about or revising the character of Mrs Sybil Birling. But which one do you think is the most important to know? Is it one of the 10 that I picked or something else entirely? Why not let me know down in the comment section below?